normally ask my wife to warm up the house.
Good morning. Wow, already 1 year has passed. I'm so shocked. I feel it's brighter than last year and better than last year. I don't know because of the church, because of you, or because of the parents. Thank you very much. I asked our partner and Jesus Christ to be here with us today, so don't get shocked. He's sitting next to you. Then let me know afterwards. Okay, thank you very much for support my husband's mission. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to give you fair warning. In this service, there will be some activity for you to perform. I'm not just going to sit there quietly and say nothing. Every single one of you is going to speak, and you're going to be challenged to look inside yourself. So, but not yet. Just feel uneasy about it for a little while, and that will be fine. You know, when I think about all the Christmases that I have celebrated, very few stand out. I have to be honest with you, most of them are eminently forgettable. And I don't forget being here last year, of course. But, you know, on the whole, I can't say that Christmas has always been a time when I've profoundly encountered God, or Jesus, or true parents. And I think that's a problem. I think it's a mistake. And so my goal today is that this Christmas should be one that stands out in your memory. That 7 or 10 or 15 years from now, you will remember Christmas 2013. I'm not quite sure how that will happen. I don't think it will be through the sermon, but it's going to be through something that you do in the next week. Okay? Fair warning. One of my most memorable Christmases was 1991, and I was in Sofia, Bulgaria. And it was shortly after the communist regime had ended. And during that whole time, almost 35 years, religion had really not been freely practiced in Bulgaria. In fact, you could go to jail for expressing your faith. So you can imagine with what excitement the first free Christmas in Sofia in all these years was celebrated. I had some Bulgarian friends, and we decided we would go to a Christmas service in the main cathedral. So I grew up Anglican, and in the Anglican church, Christmas service starts exactly on time, and it finishes exactly on time as well, because everyone is kind of keen to go home and eat turkey and give out presents, and it's very, very secular. But in the Orthodox service, first of all, no one was quite sure when it started, so we went at 9 o'clock. The church was pretty empty. I wondered, is it happening? And people kept coming in, and eventually a priest came and began spreading incense. And anyway, the Spirit started to build. There were no hymns, no sermon, no singing. And I was kind of looking at my watch thinking, wow, we've been here an hour already. And gradually the church became fuller and fuller. And after 2 hours, 12 o'clock, I asked my Bulgarian friends, well, when does this finish? They said, well, about 9 p.m. Don't worry, we're going to finish early today. So I said, well, do you stay the whole time? They said, no, you leave when you like. So I said, well, let's leave right now. I like right now. I've been here 3 hours. And, you know, in an Orthodox church, there are no seats either. So everyone is standing. And it was like trying to leave from a football game or something like that. We had to fight our way out of the church. As many people were coming in as leaving. And it took at least half an hour to physically fight our way out of church on Christmas Day. And that was 22 years ago, but I've never forgotten it, because usually I'm not fighting to get out of church or into church either. But that day was special because people were so serious to celebrate that day. For the first time, and many of them, the younger people, it was the first time in their life celebrate Christmas. And last night, Fumiko invited me to read a passage from this book, God's Ambition for the World. It's in English and Japanese. And the speech that she wanted me to share with you a little bit this morning was the meaning of Christmas. So I will find it. God's Will of Christmas. Bookmark for that. When we ask if God's original intention for this world has been completely fulfilled, the obvious answer is no. The will of God was originally thwarted because of the human fall. Through history, fallen humankind has been searching for the ultimate fulfillment of the will of God and the purpose of creation. As this providence has been advancing on many levels, God's original will or blueprint has never changed. Since the fall, God's will is focused on the goal of restoration. God is determined to save humankind, to show people how to get out of the fallen state and into the original ideal of creation. Throughout history, people have never been in a position to save themselves. Salvation comes instead from God. God must send a Savior to reveal God's original ideal of creation to the world. That man was Jesus Christ. And Father goes on in this speech to kind of reflect on the real life that Jesus experienced, how very difficult it was for him to make any headway, because people were constantly questioning everything about him. They doubted the circumstances surrounding his birth. For us today, it seems part of a supernatural story, but it wasn't like that at all at the time. Then later on, they realized that his parents fought often. Joseph and Mary were often in conflict with each other because of the circumstances surrounding Mary's pregnancy and Jesus' birth. And that stigma of illegitimacy never left Jesus throughout his life. Constantly people called into question whether he could possibly be the chosen one of God because of all these rumors surrounding his life, his lineage, and even his behavior. So many times he disrupted what they expected. He didn't seem to follow the laws of the Old Testament as strictly as some of the Pharisees. He wasn't a slave to the Sabbath. He spoke out against people who most thought were righteous and the true example. In other words, people could not understand his real identity as the true Son of God. And this extended beyond the religious realm as well. It also extended to the secular world, to the Roman Empire that was in charge at the time of Jesus' day. I was in London last week after going to Korea, and I happened to hear the Christmas sermon from the Archbishop of Canterbury. There's a new one. It was very interesting. He was speaking to a group of police officers. It was the Metropolitan Police Christmas Carol service. So he invited them to think of what it must have been like to be a police commander in Bethlehem on the first Christmas. So first of all, police then, as now, especially at Christmas time, their number one concern is maintaining public order. You don't want any fights, you don't want any riots, you just want to keep things peaceful. But Bethlehem, that first Christmas, was a very volatile place for several reasons. Number one, there was a census going on. Think about that. Bethlehem was the city of David. And so the city was filled with people who all had a direct connection to David the king. That was a problem for the Romans because they were always on the lookout for people who wanted to be a king, who might start a nationalist movement. Now suddenly there's a whole city of people, any one of whom could potentially suddenly get the revelation he was the king. Dangerous. Then there were the shepherds. Now, when I first thought about the shepherds in the Christmas story, I thought of these rather meek, gentle men dressed in white robes with a little crow quirk, but if you think about some of the other shepherds in the Bible, like King David himself, you realize that's not the case at all. Shepherds were rough, violent men. They had a lot of weapons to fend off animals, and they knew how to use them as well. Also, they had a complete disregard for property rights. They would graze their sheep and goats all over anybody's property, and they didn't care what people thought about them. And also, they were kind of known for drinking a lot as well. They drank for Israel, you could say. So, here's a group of people that one of the key goals of the police for law and order was to keep the shepherds watching their flocks by night and by day and by any other time as well. Didn't want these people in town. And then there were these foreign mystics coming in with strange prophecies of a king being born. People who didn't even speak English, Greek very well. And asking, where's the king, the one who's to be born? So it's like a perfect storm of danger from the perspective of the authorities. There's nothing more that the police must have wanted that night than to get to the morning without a riot, without an outbreak of violence. And so, what do you think they did? They probably tried to lock down the town, try to keep people off the streets. And so, instead of the birth of Jesus happening in glory and with understanding, the Father says in his speech that it took place in complete anonymity. Almost nobody knew. Even those shepherds and wise men had no real idea of what it was that they were witnessing. And in a sense, from that moment, already a great opportunity was lost. Because Jesus was only on earth for 33 years. It was very short. His mission was only 3 years. And it didn't start well from the very beginning. And I thought a little bit about Father's life as well. I'm sure many of you have read the autobiography of him. And in that we find that he also was born into an occupied land, just as Jesus was. He also was born in a time of anonymity, in a town that nobody had heard of, far away from the major population major centers, capitals of the world. Do you think that's what really God wanted? Did God really want his son to be born in obscurity, not to be known or heard of until he was 12 or 15 or 20 years old? Think about the incredible interest surrounding the royal wedding, the royal baby last year. So I'm thinking of England again. But the whole world is watching for this one family that doesn't really mean so much. This one baby that most of them will never meet. But they're interested. They're concerned. This live feed. It's so important. Father once said that the coming of the Messiah should have that kind of attention from the world. We know it did not. And now, we're faced with the fact that our Father has ascended into the spirit world. And we're left wondering, how do we go forward from here? How do we make a difference in the world and in our community? And it's that issue that I want to share with you briefly today. How does the coming of the Messiah, the coming of true parents transform my life and keep on transforming it this Christmas and every Christmas? We're all here because at some point the principle struck our lives and God moved in and told us about his providence. But that's not enough. That is not enough from the perspective of our Heavenly Parent. He expects and he wants so much more from each of us today and every Christmas. So what really matters to you and your family this Christmas? If you were to ask your children, or maybe now your grandchildren, they might say things like, well, gifts or presents or food or parties. And of course we're adults now, so we wouldn't give an answer like that. We'd say, well, it's family, it's relationships, it's getting to see each other again. But is that really the right answer either? I don't think so. I think that this Christmas, what would give God the most joy is to understand his, once again, God's purpose in sending the Messiah. morning filled again with the conviction of why this is important and why we're here, then I think we would have accomplished something really great. You know, the Bible, the principle, and Father's speeches themselves constantly depict God who is searching, God who is not content, God who is looking for something he lost. In Luke chapter 15, which some people call God's lost and found department, there are several stories of God looking for things that have been lost, told through parables. Remember, the first one is about a woman who had 100 gold coins and she lost one of them. And because that one coin was lost, she didn't think, well, I have 99, I'm okay. She desperately went out to seek for the last coin until she had 100 once again. Then in the next parable, Jesus talks about sheep. Now there's 10 sheep, and one goes missing. And then he gives the story of the prodigal son. There's 2 sons, and one goes missing. So gradually the stakes are getting higher, and Jesus is explaining how important it is for God to discover the things that have been lost. But more important than anything is for God to find his lost children. You know, I never really liked the parable of the prodigal son very much because it seemed to me it was all too easy. The prodigal son ran away by himself. He came to his senses after a while, and he came back and apologized to his father, and his father welcomed him home, and everything was right again. There's a little side story about the elder son who is resentful and upset. But in the end, this is a very functional family in the end. But I don't think it's like that, really. Some years ago, I came across the parable of the lost son, the prodigal lost son, in the Buddhist scripture, in the Lotus Sutra, which we read this morning. And I wanted to share with you that a bit, because I think this shows more accurately the real heart of God. Then I'm going to give you your exercise. So in the story of the Lotus Sutra, there's only one father and one son. And at first they're very close to each other, but they have an argument, they have a falling out. And the son decides to leave home. He runs away from his father. So far, and the father goes chasing after him, actually. The father doesn't feel comfortable that his son has just run away. I think many of the parents in the audience would understand that feeling. You can't sit still and just wait at home thinking, well, one day my son will come back and everything will be restored. No. The father set out trying to follow his son, but every time he got to a town or a village where his son had been sighted, it was just too late. The son had already moved on, and after a long while, the father gave up. He realized, I will never catch him. I will never find him. So he came back to their hometown and decided he would try to continue his life, pray for his son. But it wasn't really home anymore. So he actually moves. He relocates and finally moves to another town and becomes extremely wealthy and rich. In fact, he becomes like the king of this new town. With me so far? Meanwhile, what's happened to the son? He has been on the run for years, even a couple of decades. And everywhere he goes, he tries to be in the most humble place. He wants to keep out of trouble, keep away from the authorities, just be left alone. He feels his life is a failure, and he just doesn't know what to do. And as he wanders around, eventually he comes to the city where his father is now the king. And walking past the palace one day, he sees his father on the throne outside in those days. He doesn't recognize him, but he does recognize trouble. When he sees the mighty king, he realizes, oh, I better not stay around here, because he was a scruffy beggar with no job, no fixed abode, and he felt sure he would be arrested if he just didn't get out of town. You know, I had an experience like that once when I was fundraising in Beverly Hills, California, on Rodeo Drive, in the summer, wearing an unwashed t-shirt and trying to sell candy. It was stuck together in the heat. Yes, I remember going into one store where the cheapest item was about $3,000 for a leather wallet. And I asked this person, would you like fundraising for my church? And the man said, well, let me ask my manager. It was kind of a new fundraiser. I thought, wow, that sounds promising. And he came back and he said, no, we won't buy you a candy, but if you leave right now, we won't call the police. But he had called the police. And so my experience of fundraising in Rodeo Drive came to a rapid end. But I felt so scruffy, so dirty, so unworthy to be there with all this wealth around. That's how this son felt when he saw his father, whom he did not recognize. But the father, looking up from his throne towards the back over there, he saw his son. Even though he was dirty, he recognized him. And he thought, my son is back after so long. So he sent a couple of men to try to grab his son and bring him. But then you remember the reading there. When those two servants of the father tried to apprehend the son, he was terrified. He fought. He said, you can't arrest me. I've done nothing wrong. Leave me alone. And he fought so hard that the men had to give up. He went back and reported to the king, that man you sent us to bring with, we couldn't. He was too violent. So the king said, okay, I don't need him. Let him go. But follow him and see where he goes. And the son, as was his custom, left the wealthy part of town and went to the very outskirts. He got a very menial job in the stables. When I was in Texas, I explained that his job was sharpening bullshit. I can't say that in Clifton, New Jersey. But anyway, he was cleaning out the stables in the most miserable circumstances. And men came back and reported to the king. Okay, well, you're not going to like this, master, but your son, not your son, that man is doing the most menial task. And the king was faced with a real dilemma. What do I do? I've already tried to approach him, but he's afraid, he's terrified of me. I cannot do this by force. So he, as you might expect, took off his robes, he took off his royal clothes, dressed himself in rags and filth, and went to work side by side with his son in the stables. But he couldn't reveal who he was. He just tried to serve him, to show the example, and gradually, over a long period of time, persuaded the son to come work in his palace, doing another very simple job. Always filled with grief that he couldn't reveal himself. But there was no space in his son's heart for anything like that. Eventually the king is getting old. He's getting desperate. He's about to die, and still his son, who now he sees every day working, doing his task, still doesn't know who his father is. And the story ends, well, I'll bring it to a quick conclusion. Finally, the king is able to declare to all of his palace household and to his son who he really is, without him knowing it. All the time he has been a prince. He's been a prince of God, a prince of the king, but he never knew his real identity. And when I thought about this, I thought this story captures our real situation with God. We don't know what God thinks of us. We don't realize that we are God's royal princes and princesses because we're afraid. We're afraid. We know we're not perfect. We know we have many mistakes, many things that fall short. So we tend to draw back. We don't go into the real presence of God. Search yourself for a moment. Ask yourself if this isn't true. There's something inside holding back from being in the free presence of God. And for God himself, this is also a problem because he doesn't have actually any mouth or hands or feet. He has no real way to communicate with us directly. So think of this agony of God. He so much wants to live with us, to be with us, but he can't. We're very, very close, living in the same house, doing the same job, but there's still a gap. So how does that gap get closed? And now we come to your homework. Because if God wants to reach into your life, or to the person sitting next to you, there's only one way he can do it, and that's through each other. He cannot do it by himself. That's why God needs a Messiah, a Savior, a representative on the earth. So if God is going to make a dramatic entrance into your life, or anyone's life this Christmas, it has to happen through another person. It actually has to happen through you. Otherwise, we'll spend one more Christmas on Rodeo Drive, unworthy, feeling distant from the presence of God, and unable to understand his profound love and concern. And this is not just about this church in Clifton. Of course, we understand God loved the world. He wants to bring all his children home this Christmas. So I'm going to give you some homework now. I'm going to ask you this question. What are you going to do in this 1 week before next Sunday that will make this Christmas unforgettable? That you will remember it 7 or 15 years from now. I would put it to you that one thing that would make it profoundly memorable is if you can resolve a relationship or a problem that has been dogging you for years. Maybe it's with your spouse, or your children, or a relative, or a neighbor, or your boss. But I think every one of us has some thorn in our side, something that is not right, in which God requires us to overcome. That's a big challenge. But you know what? God does not want you to have, want me to have a comfortable Christmas. Just another forgettable, comfortable Christmas like every other one. He would like this time to be a significant challenge. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to be in pairs. That might be with your spouse, with someone sitting next to you, doesn't matter. Find a pair. Spend 40 seconds thinking about this question. What one thing could I do this week that would make a 5-year impression on my life? I believe God would like to give you that answer. Okay. Be blindingly frank. Be totally honest, because I'm only going to ask 3 people to volunteer to share what it was that God told them to do. I usually find the volunteers are sitting in the back, so let's see a few back there. All right, so you understand the assignment, right? One thing this Christmas would make a 5-year difference in my life if I could do it. What relationship could I heal? What word could I say? What deed of goodness could I do that would be transformational? 40 seconds to think about it, 2 minutes to discuss it. Each person in the pair has to say that one thing. If you can't think of one thing that you could do that would make a difference, I'll give you a second chance. Come up with one thing you will stop doing. One thing you'll stop doing that will give God a little bit of space to do something different in your life. So if you can't think of something you'll do, think of something you're doing that you shouldn't be, and how you can stop. All right, it's time to talk, to think, and then to discuss. Don't be shy. made this Christmas truly memorable. Would anyone like to volunteer? It's much better that way than me just picking on it, isn't it, Jeremy? Would you like to have it?
Right now. I've been reading a wonderful book called The Secret. Has anybody ever read it or seen part of it? As I'm reading it, and I'm not done yet, I'm realizing they're saying, this is what you do. We don't know how or why it works, but it works. Try it. Guess what? We have the principle. It's telling us the how or why it works. And what it means is we change our thinking. We change our thinking so that we can attract to us, not only to us, but to all of us, to all of the cosmos, we can attract to us the fulfillment of Chanil Guk, the fulfillment of God's Word, the fulfillment of the restoration of all the world. I encourage you to read this book. Don't think of it on a personal level. Think of how you can use these tools to change your thinking, to make God's world a reality. And I was just telling that this is what I want to do. I've been so inspired by this book that I really want to share it with everybody. So here I am. I'm beginning to share with everybody this work, this thought. One clue. How many people have had small children? Do they respond when you say, don't do that? What do? They do what you told them not to do, right? Well, this is one of the key things of this secret. When we're thinking, oh, I don't want this, I don't want that, we're attracting the thing that we don't want. Because don't and no is not a word in the reality of the cosmos. What we have to do is change our thinking. I want that. I want this. Think about it and stop yourself every 10 seconds when you start saying, change the way that you're thinking. Let's really change the way that we're thinking. Unite completely with True Mother's words, with True Mother's heart, with True Father's heart. And we can make that dream a 100,000% reality. I know we can if we can change our thinking. So I encourage you to read that book.
Thank you very much.
I feel very much like the king with the prodigal. So that's what I've done. Again, work on this.
Jason, the prodigal son. Thank you. I'd like to give you a clue about how to go about this based on our True Father's behavior and his course in Hunan. If you remember, Father did not expect to go to Hunan prison in 1948. He rather expected by then that Christians would have recognized him as the Messiah and Savior, or at least as a gifted young preacher and a patriot, and would be rallying around to support him. He went to North Korea, then the Jerusalem of the East, in the belief that there were thousands of people prepared to receive him, and probably there were, but they didn't. And he found himself instead in a communist prison camp, where he could not say a word. He couldn't preach, couldn't teach, but he still managed to win people's hearts. Not by anything he said, but by what he did, by how he lived, by how he sacrificed. What I realize is that I don't do enough of that. I like to tell people how to think or what to do, but it's not effective. The real effect comes when we model our lives on that tradition that our True Father said. And it took him years. It took him years, and he never stopped, actually, even And long after he came out of Hunan, he tried to model the path of living for the sake of others. So there is one thing we could do this week. Father always said, before you seek to govern the universe, you can govern yourself. So we can govern ourselves this Christmas week. We can, by our behavior, by our love, provide a channel for God to reach into the lives of his lost sons and daughters. There are so many. And God is desperate to reach out and touch them through us. And in doing that, God will enter our lives. And you will never forget.